Her son drugged her chamomile, then smiled across the table like nothing had changed. Irene Thomas, 74, widow and former accountant, let the tea grow cold. By dawn, their forged power of attorney would trigger a fraud alert, on record and irreversible. The locks were already changed, the bank access revoked, the trust rewritten. They thought she'd fade quietly into confusion. Instead, she documented everything and opened the door with the cops at her side. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The bathroom mirror was fogged from the shower, but Irene saw herself clearly. Eyes thinner now, skin looser around the jawline, but still here. Still her. She unscrewed the orange plastic bottle with a practiced twist. Her thumb grazed the raised label, metoprolol tartrate 25 milligrams. Take once daily. She tipped it into her hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. She froze, counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 8 pills. She should have had 11. She held the bottle to the light, shaking it softly. The tiny tablets clinked like dull marbles. Irene set the bottle on the sink, heartbeat suddenly louder than it should be for a heart patient. Had she missed doses? Taken extras? She kept a little paper log, taped to the inside of the vanity cabinet. 3 boxes, all marked off, clear as day. She swallowed hard, checked again. 8. Irene stepped back, breathing through her nose like her doctor told her after that scare last winter. Maybe Mark had moved them. Maybe they fell down the drain. Maybe. Her thoughts were broken by the low, casual thrum of voices in the kitchen. "She sleeps too much anyway," came Rachel's voice, high and edged like a nail file. A beat later, Mark's low chuckle followed. "I mean, she's not exactly climbing Everest." Irene didn't move. Her bare feet were cold on the tile. That laugh? It wasn't a joke. It was dismissal. Like she was a worn-out appliance still plugged in but long since unused. She capped the bottle, walked stiffly back to her room, and shut the door with quiet finality. The house felt smaller now, though nothing had changed. The floor plan was the same. The walls still held the same sepia-toned family photos. But the air inside had thinned. She sat at the edge of her bed and opened the lower drawer of her nightstand. The lock still worked. Her backup stash, the extra month she'd ordered during flu season, was there, tucked between folded socks and an old watch. She hadn't touched them in weeks. She counted. All 28, exactly as it should be. Her fingers trembled as she slid them further back into the drawer, covering them again. Downstairs, the television flicked on. Game show sounds. Laughter, ice clinking in glasses. She didn't recognize this kind of loneliness. It wasn't about being alone. It was about not being seen. Not really. Dinner passed in vague, stilted conversation. Rachel had cooked something overly spiced. Irene's tongue burned with each bite, but she said nothing. Mark scrolled through his phone, occasionally chuckling at something no one else could see. "Mom, you okay?" he finally asked, eyes still on the screen. "I'm fine," she said softly, setting down her fork. "Just a little tired." Rachel made a humming sound, almost smug. "You are sleeping a lot lately." Irene stood slowly. "I'll head up early." "Again?" Mark raised a brow. Irene just nodded and left the room, feeling their eyes follow her like shadows. Upstairs, the air was cooler. She sat at her desk, trying to focus. Her fingers hovered above her iPad. Something tugged at her memory, a flash of green, a small icon, a sense of something installed. Months ago? Maybe longer. She opened the home screen, flipped through pages. There, Nest Secure. Her breath hitched. She tapped it open. The loading wheel spun for a moment, then the feed blinked on. A wide-angle view of the living room. Time stamped. She swiped backward through the timeline. Afternoon. Mark walking in. Alone, going straight to the kitchen, reaching into the upper cabinet, moving something into his pocket. Then, pause. He looked around, casually, smiled, and walked out. Irene stared at the screen, the room suddenly buzzing like static. The pills hadn't gone missing, they'd been taken, and she had it, on video. Her reflection appeared faintly in the dark iPad screen, Small, yes, but very much awake. Her thumb hovered over the record button. Instead, she pressed save clip. As the house settled into sleep, Irene stayed awake. And then, beneath her list of apps, she found it. A folder she didn't remember creating. Security, Archive. It had been there all along. She tapped it open, and the screen flickered to life again. The coffee was bitter that morning. Overbrewed. Mark had made it. His attempt to help out, which always meant doing the bare minimum loud enough to be noticed. Irene stirred in one packet of sugar, watching the way it swirled but never fully dissolved. Mark sat across from her, barefoot, scrolling through something on his phone. His t-shirt was wrinkled, the collar sagging. He didn't look up. "You still taking all those?" he asked casually, as if he were asking about the weather. Irene's spoon froze mid-stir. She set it down, carefully, without a clink. "My heart medication?" Her voice was even, but her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the table. He finally glanced at her, that same thin smile he used when he used to lie about missing curfew. "I mean, you're doing fine, right? Barely leave the house. Just saying, what's the point in pumping yourself with pills every day?" Rachel wandered in wearing one of those fuzzy robes she liked to parade around in, always a size too small. She opened the fridge, letting the cold air fill the room. Irene smelled leftover tuna, milk starting to sour. "Don't rile her up," Rachel said, grabbing almond milk she never finished. "She needs a nap, not meds." The words slipped like oil across the tiles. Irene's jaw stiffened. She looked at her son. "You touched my bottle," she said quietly. Mark blinked, then smirked. "It's fine. You probably just miscounted. It happens." "I didn't?" A long beat of silence. Rachel poured cereal and crunched into it with open-mouthed confidence, like she'd already won something. "I'm going to water the geraniums," Irene said, standing slowly. Her knees popped. She steadied herself on the table. Neither of them offered help. Back in her room, Irene sat on the edge of her bed, the weight of their words circling her ribs like a belt pulled tight. She looked at the iPad on her nightstand, the one she'd nearly forgotten about. Her fingers moved with new purpose now. Settings, apps, Nest Secure. She tapped it open again. The footage from yesterday blinked on. There he was, Mark, in the kitchen, checking the cabinet like he was reaching for sugar. But his hand lingered. His shoulders hunched slightly, as if bracing for a sound. Then the movement, pocketing the small orange bottle. Pause, replay, pocket, replay again. Her son had stolen her medication. Irene's breath fogged the screen. Her finger hovered over the timeline, rewinding. She scanned for other incidents. Nothing else today. But yesterday? The day before? How long had this been happening? She tapped the gear icon and linked the iPad permanently to the camera's cloud feed, then moved to her Notes app and typed the date, the time, and a simple entry. Mark took heart meds, 8:14 a.m. cabinet, right-hand pocket. That night, she waited until the house had settled into its usual silence, Rachel snoring faintly through the vents, Mark's footsteps overhead shifting just once before stopping. Irene padded to her nightstand, pulled open the drawer, and took out the iPad. She scrolled to contacts and tapped the name she hadn't dialed in over 2 years, Nora Klein. She didn't expect an answer. She didn't need one. The voicemail beeped. "This is Irene Thomas," she said, voice low but steady. "I think it's time." She didn't say more, didn't need to. Instead, she closed the iPad, turned out the lamp, and lay back on the pillows her daughter-in-law had once mocked as old lady orthopedic. She let the darkness settle in. But inside, something had started to glow. Then came the wind, lifting the edge of her nightgown, brushing damp strands of gray hair across her face. Irene stepped off the porch with slow, deliberate feet, the wooden boards cold against her soles. She moved until she stood squarely on the lawn, soft grass slick beneath her toes. Rain pattered down, slow at first, then all at once. Cool needles waking up skin gone long untouched. She raised her face to the sky. Still here, still mine, not theirs. Lightning cracked somewhere behind the trees, far enough not to fear it, but close enough to feel the earth vibrate beneath her. The wind carried the scent of pine and wet soil, not the artificial lavender Rachel sprayed over everything. This was clean. Honest. By the time she went inside, soaked through and shivering, Irene felt something new sitting beneath her ribs, not rage, not sadness, but clarity. The next morning, she retrieved the dusty metal box from the top shelf of her closet. It took her a moment to find the key, taped beneath her dresser drawer, where Harold used to hide extra car cash. The lock clicked open with a reluctant groan. Inside, old insurance paperwork, his Army discharge forms, and, wrapped in a pale blue folder, their living trust. Her hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages, yellowed at the corners. Their names were there, just as they'd written them a decade ago, Harold Thomas and Irene Thomas, co-trustees. Upon Harold's passing, full authority to Irene. Upon her death, everything to Mark. She paused, eyes narrowing. No mention of Rachel. No clauses about shared control. She had the keys, she just hadn't remembered she was still driving. She tucked the papers into a canvas tote, sealed it with a rubber band, and checked the hall. Mark was out. He'd left with Rachel for a consultation that morning. Probably another spa package or a home redesign idea Irene wasn't supposed to have input on. Perfect. She walked 3 blocks through the misting afternoon to an old diner off the main strip, where Harold used to take her on Sundays for the early bird special. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and the air smelled of fried eggs and burnt coffee. A woman stood from a corner booth, blonde bob, blazer sharp as her eyes. "Irene," said Nora Klein, extending a hand. "It's been too long." Irene slid into the booth, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd held. Nora opened her briefcase, notepad already waiting. "You said in your voicemail, 'It's time. Tell me.'" Irene laid the trust on the table like a playing card. "They've started taking things," she said. "Small, but enough to know it won't stop here. My meds, my voice, my place in this house." Nora didn't flinch. "Do you want out?" "I want them out." Nora nodded. "You still have sole authority as the surviving trustee. That makes this easier. We can amend the trust, remove Mark as contingent heir, reassign medical and financial power of attorney." Irene sipped her lukewarm coffee. "I want everything separated. No joint access, no shared accounts. And if something happens to me, I want the house to skip him entirely." Nora raised a brow. "You want it airtight. I want it fireproof." They worked in silence for a few minutes. The quiet broken only by the clink of Nora's pen and the occasional shout from the kitchen. Then Nora leaned back, studying her. "You want this private or loud?" Irene folded her hands, the wedding band still worn on her left hand despite the ache. Her gaze drifted to the window, where a boy on a bike splashed through a puddle with purpose. She turned back, her voice cool and steady. "I'll let him hear it in echo, after the papers are filed." The morning after meeting Nora, Irene stood in the kitchen with her pill bottle in hand and let the clock tick 3 minutes past her usual dose time. Rachel noticed. Of course she did. Her eyes flicked toward the bottle, then back to the sink, where she was wiping an already clean counter. "You forget again?" Rachel asked, casual as a hammer in a velvet glove. Irene gave a soft, puzzled smile. "I must have. Getting forgetful in my old age, right?" Rachel laughed a little too loudly. "Happens to the best of us." That afternoon, Irene opened the false-bottom tin of shortbread cookies she kept in her sewing cabinet and tucked her real medication there, behind tangled thread and a half-finished scarf. In the kitchen, she left an empty Decoy bottle in the usual spot, just full enough to appear convincing. The stage was set. Dinner was leftover chicken, bland, undersalted, and Rachel offered tea after, like always. She placed it in front of Irene without being asked. The mug was floral and faintly chipped on one side. "This'll help you sleep," she said with that same syrupy tone Irene once mistook for warmth. Irene smiled politely but didn't lift the mug. She waited until Rachel had turned, then reached for her iPad, which now lived permanently under a stack of old mail on the counter. Earlier that day, she'd angled the living room camera to face the kitchen doorway just enough to catch the counter. It was blurry. low light and grainy video, but as she played it back, she saw exactly what she needed. Mark, alone, hands moving quickly. A small bottle, not hers, not labeled. A pinch of powder poured into the mug. He stirred it with the silver spoon, tapped it against the rim, then walked out whistling. Irene paused the footage. Her hand didn't shake this time. She tapped share, selected Nora's contact, and typed just 3 words: attempted sedation. Attached. Then she opened her voice memos app. There was something brutally honest about speaking to no one, no audience to convince, no eyes judging her pace, her age, her presence. She hit record. Day 1. They're still pretending it's kindness. Rachel calls it helping when she hovers. Mark won't look me in the eye. I hid the real pills today. I think they believe I took theirs. Maybe they hope I will. If you're hearing this, it means they won, or tried. I'm keeping this for my own memory, or for a judge. Silence. A slow exhale. This is my record if they win. She saved the file and named it Memo 01. The next few days passed like quiet warfare. Irene played forgetful, distracted, compliant. She accepted tea, left it untouched. She made slow, deliberate movements, letting Mark believe she was slowing down. She waited, and then came the knock. Evening, just before sunset, as the last bit of light spilled orange across the front porch. Irene opened the door to a woman with tightly curled hair and large silver earrings, who smiled as if they'd met before. "I'm Justine," she said softly, leaning in so Mark and Rachel, chatting in the living room, wouldn't hear. "Rachel's sister." Irene stiffened. "I remember." Justine's eyes darted behind Irene, then lowered her voice to a whisper. "Have you decided about the home yet?" Irene blinked. "What home?" Justine gave a small, practiced smile. "Oh, I was told there was going to be a transition. Rachel said you'd be moving soon? Downsizing? Maybe a facility?" The word hit like a slap. Irene stepped back and shut the door without another word. She stood there, the doorknob still warm in her hand, her ears ringing. So that was the plan. Not just sedation. Eviction. Irene had been lying in bed with her eyes closed, the room heavy with mid-afternoon stillness, when the first drawer creaked. She didn't move. She counted the seconds between steps, 4, maybe 5, light ones. Not Mark. The faint floral scent that followed confirmed it. Rachel, slipping into the study like a mouse in designer flats. Irene cracked one eye just enough to see the door ajar. She heard the binder slide from the second shelf of the hallway cabinet. A distinct, leathery thud. Irene's fingers curled around the edge of her quilt. The emergency binder, labeled in tidy, faded handwriting, legal, medical, for Irene or Harold Thomas. She had always kept it in one place, visible but untouched. It held every paper Rachel fantasized about, copies of the deed, old wills, Harold's living trust documents, insurance, durable power of attorney. Or so Rachel thought. Later that evening, once Rachel and Mark had gone to bed, 2 voices behind closed doors, muffled by entitlement and scented lotion, Irene got to work. She placed the original binder in a fireproof safe under her bed and retrieved a clean new binder from the downstairs filing cabinet. Its red leather was unscuffed, too new. She made it look used, smudged the corners, spilled a drop of tea on the edge, let one tab bend slightly. Then came the traps. She typed a new will, naming Rachel as executor, giving the house to Mark and his legal spouse, but noted the wrong address on the deed. She included fake medical directives, alluding to early signs of dementia, and a forged letter from a retirement home she never contacted. And the final touch, a fabricated power of attorney, granted pending cognitive incapacity, signed not by Irene, but by a fictional notary named Marla Jennings. She tucked the binder in the same cabinet and left the door slightly open. It took less than 24 hours. The next afternoon, pretending to nap again, she heard the drawer slide open once more. This time she watched from her bedroom camera feed. Rachel stood there in a long cardigan, her phone in hand, flipping through pages and photographing them one by one. Her movements were greedy but cautious, like a thief who still thought they had permission. Later that day, Rachel told Mark she was going to lunch with Lacey from the salon. But Irene followed her. Quiet shoes, long coat, sunglasses. She stayed 2 cars back the entire way until Rachel parked outside a brunch cafe on the edge of town. Irene parked across the street, waited. Rachel stepped inside and greeted a man in a suit, early 50s, silver beard, holding a leather portfolio. Irene didn't need to hear the words. She saw Rachel slide the binder pages into his hands, watched them lean together, heads low, papers spread like cards across the table, real estate documents, legal paperwork. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She walked back to her car and, before turning the key, whispered aloud, "Checkmate." By that evening, Nora had already called. "I just got a notification from the clerk's office," Nora said. "There's been a filing, a durable power of attorney, supposedly signed by you. They're trying to activate it." Irene didn't speak for a long moment. Then, dryly, "Did it list Marla Jennings as the notary?" Nora was silent for a beat, then laughed. "You planted it." "They filed it using a document that doesn't exist," Irene said. "Even the address on the will is off. I gave them rope. They built the noose." The line went quiet again. Then Nora's voice dropped low. "Irene," she said carefully, "I think it's time for the police." Irene sat at her desk, the glow of her iPad casting sharp shadows across her face. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, dragging files into a folder labeled "In Case I Vanish." She paused after each clip, Mark pocketing her medication, Rachel stirring something into her tea, the fake binder handoff in broad daylight. Click, transfer. Her voice memos were next. Each one raw, her breath a quiet undercurrent beneath whispered truths. "This is my record if they win," echoed softly as she played the first one again. She stared at her reflection in the darkened window, hair pinned back, mouth a firm line, eyes steady. They thought her forgettable, but she remembered everything. She plugged in the thumb drive, a matte black rectangle, no label, and let it swallow her evidence whole. 36 files. She ejected it and held it in her palm, its plastic warm from use. Her fingers closed around it like it was flint, not plastic. A weapon. A fuse. The Adult Protective Services office was tucked behind the courthouse, hidden between a nail salon and a faded tax firm with plastic blinds. Irene walked in wearing her late husband's pea coat, gray scarf wound neatly around her neck. She had taken a cab, less traceable than Mark's spare key fob. "Appointment with Detective Carson," she said to the receptionist. Her voice was calm, measured. The young man behind the desk looked up, surprised. "1 second." She waited. Didn't fidget. A door opened 5 minutes later, and a man in his mid-50s stepped out. Tall, clean-shaven, with kind eyes and a tie that didn't quite match. "Mrs. Thomas?" he asked. "Miss now," she corrected softly. They shook hands. Inside his small office, wood-paneled and cluttered with manila folders, Irene sat and placed the thumb drive on the table like a poker chip. Carson looked at it, then back at her. "I have footage, audio diaries, documents. They've been drugging me, trying to stage a mental decline." He didn't interrupt, just took the drive, plugged it in, and clicked open the first clip. The sound of Mark's voice filled the room. "You don't need them anyway." Irene watched Carson's face shift as the footage played. When it ended, he leaned back. "Mrs. Thomas, this isn't just inheritance abuse, it's endangerment." Her eyes didn't blink, then stopped them. He nodded, already scribbling notes. "We'll start with toxicology. Can I have a sample of the tea or medication?" "I saved everything," she said, "including the spoon." The next afternoon, Carson called. "Substances were found," he said, voice grave. "A sedative, non-prescribed." Irene didn't say anything at first. "We've filed a temporary protective order. Quietly. They won't be able to legally remove you from the home or act on your behalf until this is resolved." She exhaled, not relief, something colder, something final. Carson continued. "I'm coordinating with a medical advocate. They'll do an independent wellness check soon. Just stay calm. We're on your side." That evening, Nora called. "I've filed for a temporary freeze on the property," she said. "That prevents them from selling, transferring, or refinancing anything tied to your name." Irene sipped her tea. The real tea now, one she'd made herself. Mint, no additives. Still hot. "Thank you," she said. "Don't lift the freeze until I say." Outside, the porch light flickered on. Mark's truck pulled into the driveway, headlights sweeping across the living room like a searchlight. She stayed seated. The front door opened. Heavy steps. Then a grunt from the hallway. Mark's voice echoed down the hall. "Mom, did you mess with the bank again?" No answer. He stormed into the kitchen, pulled out his phone, tried the ATM app. Nothing. She could almost hear it. The hard denial chime. He shouted louder this time. "Why the hell is your card declined?" Irene stood slowly, her bones stiff but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The next morning, the nurse arrived at 9 o'clock sharp, clipboard in hand, badge pinned to her chest, with a face like steel wrapped in lavender. Her name was Geneva, and she greeted Irene like an equal, not a patient. Mark opened the door with a half laugh. "Sorry, we didn't call for—" "She's here for me," Irene said, brushing past him in her freshly ironed cardigan. "I hired her." Geneva turned to Mark. "I'm contracted directly through Ms. Thomas's trust. All care decisions are under her authority." Rachel appeared in the hallway, lips already pursed. "Wait, since when does she—" "Since always," Irene cut in. "You can wait in the other room." Geneva followed her into the sunlit parlor, sat across from her at the round table Harold built decades ago, and began her intake checklist. No one else was invited. The following day, during Geneva's second visit, Irene excused herself with a quiet nod and slipped out the front door. Mark and Rachel were too busy bickering upstairs about the nurse's hourly rate to notice. She walked 2 blocks to a notary tucked inside a UPS store. The air smelled like toner and packing tape. Irene signed the revised title deed with her favorite pen, navy blue ink, the way Harold had always done it, one signature, one swift removal. Mark's name disappeared from the home. She left with a copy of the updated transfer sealed in an envelope marked "Confirmed," trust owner, Irene M. Thomas. The next stop was the bank. She wore her late husband's jacket again. It gave her posture. The branch manager, a soft-spoken man in suspenders, greeted her by name. "I'd like to revoke access to all joint accounts. Effective immediately." He blinked. "You'll need to show ID and—" She slid her driver's license and trust paperwork across the desk. He scanned the documents. His tone shifted. "I can process that now." 15 minutes later, Mark and Rachel no longer had a financial umbilical cord to tug. Irene left with a new debit card and a revised account agreement. Sole signatory, Irene M. Thomas. That night, Mark slammed a kitchen drawer. "You changed the locks on the bank too?" Irene stirred her soup and didn't answer. "You know we've been helping you," he snapped. She turned to him, ladle in hand, eyes steady. "Is that what you call it?" His mouth opened but no words followed. Rachel sulked in the living room, phone in hand, probably drafting another social media post about toxic elders. Irene sat at the table, folded her napkin across her lap, and took her time chewing. Geneva had taught her that silence was a form of dominance, too. The next day, Carson called. "We've built a solid case. Video, audio, toxicology, paper trail." "Good," Irene said, still flipping through the mail like nothing mattered more than coupons. "But it's your call," Carson continued. "Quiet arrest, no sirens, no attention, or public. Walk them out in cuffs. Let the neighbors see." Irene paused. The idea settled over her like a warm coat. Out the window, Rachel was hosing down her car in the driveway like she lived there. Mark was trimming the hedge he never asked permission to plant. A normal afternoon, as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. Irene's hand hovered over the open envelope in front of her, a new insurance policy under her name only. Her voice came low, deliberate. "Let's wait until the house is empty." Carson chuckled quietly. "Understood." Irene waited until the garage door rumbled shut behind Mark and Rachel's SUV before she moved. She counted exactly 4 seconds after the beep, just long enough to know the car had pulled away, but not far enough that they'd double back for forgotten coupons. She walked to the front door, locked it, and turned the bolt until it clicked. Then she reached under the hall table, retrieved the envelope labeled Henderson Locksmiths, and opened the side drawer where Rachel once kept her real estate brochures. One by one, she laid out the new brass keys, cold, unforgiving. The locksmith came 15 minutes later, a young woman with a buzz cut and tattoos down both arms. She was quick, respectful, no questions asked, changed all 3 exterior locks in under an hour. "You want the old keys back?" she asked, jingling the cut brass. Irene met her eyes and smiled. "Number, toss them." Next came the living room. The peach-toned throw pillows Rachel loved were stuffed into a trash bag. That absurd golden lamp shaped like a giraffe went next. Irene boxed up every faux farmhouse sign, "Gather, grateful, but first, coffee," and stacked them neatly near the front door. The walls looked bare, exposed. For the first time in months, the air in the house felt neutral again, unscented, undecorated, undecided. Irene opened every window, letting in wind and a hint of distant rain. She hauled the boxes to the trunk of her car, drove them straight to Goodwill, and didn't glance back once. When she returned, paint bucket in hand, she stood before the wall Rachel had staked her claim on, the oversized cursive "Live," "Laugh," "Love," decal she'd applied one Sunday while Irene was recovering from a flu shot. It took 2 coats of eggshell white to silence it. She applied them both with the same slow, deliberate motion Harold used when polishing his tools in the garage. She wiped the paintbrush clean like it was a ritual, not a chore. Next, Harold's study. It had become a dumping ground under Rachel's regime, coupon inserts, shipping boxes, her broken ring light she meant to return. Irene spent the next 2 hours clearing it out. Every item that didn't belong was gone. She dusted off Harold's desk, set his fountain pen back in the drawer, and placed a framed photo of their wedding day front and center. Next to it, she added a picture of their daughter Anna, long gone now, smiling in a cap and gown. Above it all, she hung the American flag triangle folded in its display case. Order restored. At exactly 3:45 p.m., Nora arrived. She wore a trench coat and a storm of confidence. "This is it," she said, handing Irene a thick envelope. "Deed filed, registered, all yours, only yours." Irene took it without a word and ran her hand over the top. There were no signatures from Mark, no Rachel, just hers and Harold's from years ago. Nora nodded toward the study. "Looks like he'd approve." "He would," Irene said. She didn't add more. She didn't need to. That night, Irene unzipped her suitcase and began packing slowly, not with panic, just quiet purpose. 2 sweaters, 1 pair of slacks, a pair of walking shoes, her passport, a blank journal. She slipped the envelope with the new deed inside the suitcase liner, zippered it closed, and set it beside her bed. At 10:14 p.m., the doorknob jiggled. Then again. A pause, then a frantic rattle. Outside, Mark's voice rose like steam. "Mom? The hell's wrong with the lock?" Rachel followed, her tone sharp. "Did you change? The keys?" Irene sat at her kitchen table, feet warm in her slippers, sipping peppermint tea. She turned to her laptop and entered a new Wi-Fi name, NotYourHouse_5, G password, find your exit. She pressed save. Mark's voice grew louder. "The Wi-Fi's down." Rachel banged on the door. Irene smiled into her cup. The morning after locking them out, Irene sat at the kitchen table beneath the soft hum of the ceiling fan, sipping chamomile and reading a letter from the Community Advocacy Network for Elders. The logo was simple, 2 open hands, and the letter was signed in blue ink by a woman named Denise Rallins. Denise called at 9 a.m. sharp. Her voice was warm, slow, deliberate, like a song sung only once a day. "I just want to hear your story," she said. So Irene told her. She kept her voice steady as she recounted the missing pills, the tea laced with powder, the forged binder, and the fake POA filed in her name. She spoke of the quiet humiliations, the way they talked around her in her own home, the way Mark used her credit card like it was his birthright, the way Rachel rearranged her life like a bad interior designer with too much time and not enough soul. Denise didn't interrupt once. When Irene finished, there was a pause. Then, "You're doing something many don't survive long enough to attempt." I'll file the statement for the official record. You'll have backup now, just in case. By noon, Rachel had called 5 times, then texted, "We need to talk. You're being irrational. Mom, come on. We're family. We're all stressed. Don't ruin everything because you misunderstood something." Irene blocked her number without ceremony. The silence that followed was immediate. Blessed. That afternoon, she met with Nora at the legal aid office. They sat side by side in a small glass-walled conference room, a copy of her old will in front of them, corners yellowed and annotated. Nora uncapped her pen. "Ready?" Irene didn't hesitate. "Leave it all to the Willow House shelter, no exceptions, no family." Nora looked at her. "Not even a symbolic amount? $1? They didn't leave me $1's worth of dignity." Nora didn't argue. She just started writing. Later that evening, Irene scrolled through Rachel's Facebook page. The public posts were set to friends only, but Irene still had access. Rachel had forgotten to remove her. One post caught her eye. "We gave everything. Some people just want to be victims. Family is hard. Gratitude goes both ways." Below it, a photo of Rachel in a sun hat, sitting by a pool, captioned, "Self-care, because sometimes you have to let go." Irene laughed once, dry and short, and closed the app. In the garage, under a dust cloth, sat the salon chair Rachel had begged to store just for a few weeks. Leatherette, cracked near the base but still functional. Irene hauled it onto a dolly and wheeled it to the curb. She watched as a charity truck pulled up, men in red polos loading it like it weighed nothing. "Donating on behalf of someone?" one of them asked, smiling. "No," Irene replied. "I'm donating on behalf of myself." The APS report arrived by courier in a sealed folder. She opened it with calm hands. Subject: Mark Thomas status. Confirmed flag in National Elder Abuse Database, NEA-D, case. Type: medical endangerment, financial exploitation protective measures, active. She stared at the words without blinking. It was done. Not the end, but a line drawn in ink that couldn't be erased. That night, Irene lit a candle in the study and placed it beside her wedding photo. Harold had always believed in quiet justice. She wondered what he'd think of all this. Probably smile, probably pour her a scotch. The house was hers again. The air felt still, but not empty. Then came a knock. Sharp. Urgent. She moved slowly to the door but didn't open it. A legal envelope had been slipped through the mail slot, sealed and marked urgent. Filed petition enclosed. She opened it at the table under her reading lamp. Inside, motion to initiate mental capacity hearing. Petitioner, Rachel Thomas. Claim, cognitive instability. Endangerment to self and others. Irene read the first paragraph twice. She leaned back in her chair and let the laughter rise up from somewhere deep, an astonished, bitter laugh that cracked the silence like thunder. They weren't done. The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and industrial cleaner, sharp, sterile, like they were trying to erase history. Irene sat alone at the long table to the right, a stack of neatly labeled folders in front of her. She wore her best blazer, the navy one with the brass buttons Harold used to say made her look like a senator. Rachel sat across the aisle, arms crossed tight over a cream blouse she'd clearly ironed for the occasion. Mark slouched beside her, tapping his foot under the bench like he couldn't decide whether to be smug or scared. The bailiff called out, "In the matter of Rachel Thomas vs. Irene M. Thomas, capacity motion hearing now in session." Irene didn't flinch. 3 days earlier, she'd sat in the quiet beige office of Dr. Halverson, a clinical neuropsychologist with a gentle voice and probing eyes. "No trick questions," he'd said. "Just you, me, and your brain." They spent over 2 hours talking about her memory, her routine, her medications. He gave her problem-solving exercises, memory recall tests, language games. Irene breezed through them with the same focus she used when balancing her checkbook by hand. At the end, she'd looked him square in the eye and asked, "Do I look lost to you, doctor?" He smiled, not remotely. Now, in court, Nora stood beside Irene's chair and pulled out the first folder. "Your Honor," Nora began, "what we have here is not a question of capacity. It's a coordinated attempt to remove a mentally competent woman from her home and assets. We've submitted medical records, a notarized cognitive assessment from Dr. Halverson, and an independent wellness evaluation from Adult Protective Services. All show that Ms. Thomas is in excellent health and of sound mind. The judge, a steely woman in rimless glasses, thumbed through the file. I see that. Nora didn't slow down. We've also included pharmacy records indicating tampering with medication, video footage of the alleged theft, and a signed affidavit from Geneva North, Ms. Thomas's registered nurse, confirming repeated attempts to drug and isolate her. She tapped her folder once, deliberate, all orchestrated by the petitioners. Rachel's face turned the color of spoiled milk. Mark leaned forward, his jaw clenching. Objection. You're not counsel, the judge snapped. Sit down. Nora handed Irene a printed document, her neuropsychological evaluation. Irene rose with it in hand. Her voice was quiet at first, but the silence around her made it carry. My name is Irene M. Thomas. I was born in a house without electricity. I lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis, 3 recessions, and the loss of the only man I've ever loved. I read the paper every morning, balance my own finances, and know the names of all 4 nurses at my primary clinic. She held the evaluation up. This says I have higher than average executive function and intact long-term memory. I may be old. I am not yours. Gasps flickered around the courtroom like popcorn under pressure. Someone dropped a pen. The judge nodded once. I'm dismissing the motion for incapacity with prejudice. That means they can't bring this claim again. Rachel looked like she'd swallowed vinegar. Mark muttered something under his breath. The gavel cracked once. Case closed. Outside the courtroom, reporters hadn't gathered, yet, but the hallway buzzed. A woman in a floral blazer from the local newspaper cornered Irene with a notebook half out of her purse. Was it true about the footage? Irene smiled without showing teeth. Every frame. Behind her, Nora and Detective Carson stood shoulder to shoulder. Well done, Nora whispered. You didn't just win, you leveled them. Rachel pushed past Irene in the hallway, sunglasses on despite the cloudy day. Mark followed, head down. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The silence was surrender. As the elevator doors closed, Detective Carson turned to Irene. You know, most people would be satisfied by now. She said nothing. He raised an eyebrow. So, are you pressing charges? Irene didn't answer. Yet. At 5:47 a.m., the world outside Irene's sunroom was still cloaked in a soft blue hush. The grass glistened from last night's rain. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then stopped. Inside, Irene poured herself a cup of Earl Grey, the steam curling like a ribbon toward the ceiling. She reached for the silver pen on the corner of her table, the one Harold had given her for their 40th anniversary. The nib still scratched ever so slightly on the paper, a sound she found satisfying. She signed the bottom of the form in a slow, even line. Eviction notice, due to elder abuse and fraudulent claims filed under property ownership statute. Immediate enforcement approved by protective order. She capped the pen with a click. There was no ceremony, no trembling. Only a deep, long breath, the kind you take when it's your turn to speak after being talked over for too long. At 6:02 a.m. on the dot, Detective Carson stepped onto the porch, official badge visible, document in hand. His knock was polite but firm. Twice, no more. Rachel opened the door in a tangle of bedsheets, her mascara smudged under one eye. Is this some kind of joke? She whispered, voice cracking. No, ma'am, Carson said, his tone devoid of sympathy. This is an official service of notice. You and Mr. Thomas are being evicted. Effective immediately. Mark appeared behind her, shirtless, and already red in the face. You've got to be kidding me, he barked. She's throwing her own son out? After everything? Carson didn't flinch. You've been flagged in an elder abuse report. This order was signed under emergency protection statutes. Rachel's mouth fell open. She turned toward the street, disoriented, clutching her phone like it could rewind time. Then the tears came, loud, ugly, mascara-streaked. She collapsed onto the porch swing as if gravity had conspired against her. Mark shouted something about lawyers. Irene didn't bother catching the words. She sat in her sunroom, sipping her tea, the golden light of morning slowly warming the floor tiles around her bare feet. Geneva, the nurse, stood nearby holding the new set of keys. "You sure you want it done today?" Geneva asked gently. "Sunrise seemed appropriate," Irene said, her eyes still on the porch where her son's red-faced rage had begun to fade into disbelief. "They spent a year soft-killing me with silence. This is just volume control." Geneva smiled and handed the keys to the locksmith waiting outside. The locks were changed again, newer ones, with smart chip access that only Irene and Geneva controlled. A quiet click as each lock fell into place. By 7:10 a.m., Rachel and Mark stood on the sidewalk, 2 suitcases between them. Rachel clutched her purse like a lifeline. Mark glared at the door as if it owed him something. They didn't knock again. At 8:30, Nora arrived with a manila folder and her usual no-nonsense stride. "The final filings are in," she said, flipping through the pages. "Your revised will, the asset list, the disinheritance clause. Everything's airtight." "Good," Irene replied, taking the folder. "No appeals, no loopholes." "Not unless they find a time machine." They shared a short smile, 2 women who understood how quiet power really moved, in pen strokes and proof, not shouting. Nora turned to leave but paused. "You know what you did, it's rare. Most don't fight back until it's too late." Irene glanced out the window. Rachel was still on the curb, thumbing her phone. Mark was pacing, waiting for a ride that might never come. "They tried to write my ending," Irene said. "I just turned the page." Her tea had gone lukewarm when the phone rang, a new number. She answered without thinking. "Hello?" A bright voice answered. "Hi, Ms. Thomas. This is Elena, from Oak and Brick Realty. Someone's expressed interest in the home, if you're still thinking about selling." Irene looked out at her porch, at the dawn still stretching across her lawn like a promise. "Interesting," she said, voice unreadable. The realtor sat across from Irene in the study, a legal pad resting on her lap, her pen poised and hopeful. The woman was young, mid-30s maybe, with a warm smile and polished nails that tapped gently against her clipboard as she spoke. "I just wanted to confirm interest," she said carefully. "We've had 2 informal offers already, the location, the yard, the layout. It's a seller's dream." Irene looked around the room, the framed photo of Harold in uniform, the ticking brass clock on the mantel, the sun pooling across the hardwood floor like it always had in the early hours. "I'm not selling," she said simply. The realtor blinked, startled. "Oh, that's totally okay, of course. We can revisit in 6 months." Irene shook her head. "No, dear, not later, not ever. This house isn't going on the market. It's going into the ground with me, metaphorically speaking." She slid a folder across the table. Inside, a signed property deed transfer drafted by Nora. New owner, the Willow House Foundation, the same shelter that had taken in dozens of women like Irene, women who'd once believed they had nowhere to go. The realtor opened the folder and let out a soft breath. "You're donating it? To the shelter?" Irene smiled without softness. Let them try to inherit that. That night, she filmed herself. Just her and the webcam on her laptop. No filters, no music. Her voice, clear and deliberate, spoke into the still air of the sunroom. To the ones who tried to silence me, "I'm not confused. I'm not fading. I'm not yours. You drugged me, laughed at me, filed false papers with my name on them. You thought I wouldn't notice because I knit scarves and take afternoon naps. But I did. And I kept every receipt. So if you're watching this, know that you didn't get the house, you didn't get the money, you didn't get to win. To those who've been made invisible, I see you. And I'm not going quietly." She uploaded the video to a local advocacy group's page, titled it simply, "My name is Irene Thomas." She didn't expect much. She underestimated herself. By morning, the video had over 8,000 views. By evening, 25,000. The comments scrolled endlessly, some from strangers, some from women using initials, others anonymous but full of rage and relief. "My mother went through the same thing. Thank you for fighting back. They tried to take my grandmother's house. We still haven't gotten justice. You're a hero, Ms. Thomas. Thank you for speaking out. Local news outlets picked it up. Then came the messages from shelters across the state asking to share the clip. And finally, one email, marked urgent in the subject line. It was from a nonprofit founder out of Portland. She'd seen the video. She wanted Irene to collaborate on a new statewide program focused on elder protection and inheritance fraud. "You have the voice they can't ignore," she wrote. Irene read the email 3 times, then closed her laptop. Her tea had gone cold again, but she didn't mind. 2 days later, at the town mall, a former neighbor spotted Rachel behind the counter of a skincare kiosk. She was restocking a shelf of discounted vitamin serums, head down, apron on. The photo landed in Irene's inbox, sent without comment. She didn't forward it, didn't even reply, but she saved it in a folder called Irrelevant. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, a white envelope arrived in her mailbox. No return address. Heavy linen paper. She opened it carefully. "Dear Ms. Thomas, we've been following your story. We believe your journey deserves to be seen and heard. We'd like to feature you in a documentary on elder justice and financial recovery. If you're willing, let's begin." Irene looked up from the letter, the fading light catching her glasses just so. For once, she didn't feel erased. She felt recorded. The envelope arrived by courier, thick and unbending, sealed with a gold-embossed sticker that shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. Irene opened it at her kitchen table, hands steady. The scent of ink and cardstock drifted out like something sacred. Inside was the final deed. Official, stamped, irrefutable. Owner, Irene M. Thomas, sole trustee, executor, beneficiary. She stared at the name, her name, centered cleanly on the title like it had always been there, and never once contested. She traced the letters with the tip of her finger, then stood and walked it to the living room. There, beside the fireplace, sat the wedding photo she and Harold had taken in 1973. Black and white, edges curled from age, his hand wrapped protectively around hers. She placed the deed in a walnut frame and set it beside the photo. No ribbon, no plaque, just presence. Later that day, Nora stopped by with something wrapped in linen, tied with red twine. "You've earned more than a manila folder," she said. Irene untied the cord and opened the bundle slowly. Inside was a bound leather book, legal black, no title on the cover, but inside it contained every document Nora had ever filed on Irene's behalf: eviction orders, trust amendments, medical affidavits, power of attorney revocations, a transcript from the capacity hearing, sealed and notarized, even a photo of the emergency binder Rachel had tried to weaponize. On the final page, a quote in Nora's handwriting: "You did this because you remembered who you were." N.K. Irene closed the book and pressed it gently against her chest. "I remember everything," she said. 3 nights later, the Willow House Shelter hosted their annual fundraising gala. Irene was their keynote speaker. She hadn't spoken to a crowd in over 20 years, not since she'd given a reading at Harold's retirement ceremony. But now, standing behind a clear acrylic podium under twinkling lights in a hotel ballroom, she felt nothing but calm. A slow storm of conviction. The room hushed as she adjusted the microphone. "I used to think fading was part of aging," she began. "That losing visibility was something you had to accept, like loose skin or early dinners. But fading isn't natural. It's taught, and I unlearned it." She looked across the crowd, mostly women, mostly over 40, some with tissues in their laps, some with fire in their eyes. "They took my medicine, my keys, my name. They filed papers I never signed, and they called it care. But I wrote back, in ink, in law, in my own voice." A standing ovation swelled the room. Some clapped with their palms, others pounded the table with emotion. The applause didn't feel polite. It felt relieved, like they'd all been holding something in and finally let it out. After the gala, as Irene made her way toward the exit, a reporter approached. Early 30s, hair pinned back, press badge around her neck. She spoke gently, as if speaking to someone sacred. "Ms. Thomas, would you ever consider publishing your story? We're doing a series on elder empowerment, and what you've done is unprecedented." Irene blinked, not out of surprise, but out of how unsurprising it felt now. "I'll think about it," she said. "Let's just say this chapter isn't finished yet." The woman nodded, slipping a card into Irene's hand with the kind of reverence reserved for authors, not survivors. The next morning, Irene sat by her mailbox with a cup of cinnamon coffee, steam curling in the crisp air. Birds pecked at the lawn. A neighbor waved from across the street. She opened the stack of mail slowly, sorting bills from ads, flyers from real envelopes. At the bottom, one stood out, plain white, no return address, but unmistakably familiar handwriting. Slanted, careless, masculine. She took it inside and sat down at the table. The envelope had only one thing inside, a single piece of lined notebook paper folded once. "Mom, I don't know what to say anymore. I know I did wrong. I see it now. I don't want anything. I just want to talk. One conversation. Please. Mark." She read it twice, then once more. The page trembled slightly in her hand, but her fingers did not. The letter sat on the kitchen table for 2 days. Unmoved, unread after the first time, folded neatly again, as if respecting its own futility. Irene walked past it often, on her way to the sink, to her garden gloves, to the clock she reset after a brief outage. But she never touched it. On the third morning, she opened the small drawer beneath the hall table. Inside were 6 envelopes, each with the same slanted handwriting. Mark, one from the rehab center, one from Rachel's shared P.O. box, a scribbled birthday apology, 2 holiday cards, all unopened, all neatly stacked. She placed the new letter on top and closed the drawer. A thin strip of tape on the front read, "No response needed." 3 days later, she boarded a bus to Maine. Not a plane. She wanted to feel the distance, watch it stretch across her like thread unraveling from something too tight. The bus rolled through Connecticut at dawn, fields swept by like paintings in motion. She sipped gas station coffee that tasted like cardboard and memory, and watched the mist cling to the glass. By the time they crossed into Portland, the air smelled of salt and fir trees. She stepped off with one small suitcase, her camera bag, and a guidebook worn soft with years of wishful dog ears. She'd waited decades to come here, not with Harold, not with family, alone, on purpose. She stayed in a coastal inn with creaky floors and linen curtains that fluttered even when the windows were shut. The place smelled like driftwood and lemon oil. The woman at the front desk said, "You here for the peace or the view?" "Both," Irene replied. Every morning she walked the shore path in boots still damp from sea spray. Every evening she wrote a postcard, never to Mark, never to Rachel, only to the women of Willow House. "Saw a harbor seal today, thought of all the times I stayed quiet to keep the peace. Funny how nature's louder when you stop trying to shush it. This place smells like freedom and seaweed." In that order. She sent 6 postcards in total, each with a different view, each with a version of herself she thought had died 10 years ago, or maybe more. On her last afternoon, she climbed the hill to the lighthouse, the one from every painting and postcard, standing bold against a backdrop of sky as wide as silence itself. The wind was high, almost biting. Her scarf danced behind her like a flag. She sat on a bench carved from driftwood and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. No title, no name, just pages, waiting. She wrote slowly, "Dear Irene, you made it. You lost nearly everything except the one thing they couldn't take. Your will to write the ending yourself. They tried to blur you, drug you, quiet you. But you remembered who you were, and you became louder than their lies. This house you protected, the life you rebuilt, it isn't about revenge anymore. It's about reclamation. And now you've seen the ocean. Now you've left the state. Now you've left the silence. Don't forget this version of you, the one who knows what a second chance smells like, salt and paper and sun-warmed stone. Love, always, you." She folded the letter, pressed it flat, and tucked it into a self-addressed envelope she had pre-stamped weeks earlier. It felt odd, sending something to a place she'd already left, but this wasn't about distance. It was about arrival. She walked back into town, coat zipped high, and dropped the envelope into a blue mailbox near the marina. The flag on the box stood upright. She mails the letter to her own home address. She smiled, turned away, and didn't look back. When Irene stepped out of the cab, the morning light glinted off the brass house numbers like they were freshly minted. Her suitcase wheels clicked softly against the walkway. She expected silence. She got paper, notes, dozens of them. Taped to her mailbox, tucked into the screen door, folded inside flower pots and wedged under the welcome mat. One handwritten on a coffee-stained napkin, another scribbled in crayon on pink construction paper. "Thank you for not giving up. You gave me courage to tell my sister no, you are not alone. Neither are we." The porch smelled of lavender and rain-soaked paper. Irene stood for a long moment, one hand over her mouth. The quiet she returned to wasn't the old kind, the kind they used to keep her small. This silence was full of weight, of love, of witness. She carried her suitcase inside, unpacked only what mattered: a worn journal, a clean blouse, the bound legal book Nora had given her, and one envelope. Self-addressed, lightly wrinkled from travel, now waiting in her palm. She opened it carefully and pulled out the letter she had written to herself under the lighthouse. The ink had held, her words still intact. "You made it. You lost nearly everything except the one thing they couldn't take, your will to write the ending yourself. Now you've left the silence." She pressed the letter to her chest and let herself weep. Not grief, not rage, just the sweet, sacred release of a woman coming home to herself. That weekend, she hosted a garden party, not extravagant, but intentional. Folding chairs in neat rows, finger sandwiches, lemonade with sprigs of mint. The women from Willow House came early, helping her string lights across the magnolia trees and set candles inside mason jars. Geneva arrived with peach cobbler. Nora brought wine and a bouquet of sunflowers wrapped in butcher paper. One woman, Andrea, came wearing a scarf Irene had knitted for the shelter years ago and never expected to see again. "This place," Andrea whispered, eyes scanning the yard, "feels like a beginning." Irene nodded. "It is." As dusk settled, fireflies flickered in the hedges. Irene stood at the center of her garden, a champagne flute in hand. She tapped it once with her fingernail, a light chime cutting through the hum of conversation. "To those who were told they were too much, too forgetful, too soft," she began. "To the ones who were managed instead of listened to, who were patted on the head and then robbed blind." She raised her glass high, steady. "To the unheard, the unseen, and the undefeated. We are not done." Glasses clinked all around her, some with smiles, others with tears. A soft wind passed through the garden, carrying the scent of rosemary and hydrangeas. Irene walked back into her house, the room now dim with golden light. She paused at the fireplace, where her wedding photo still stood, the newly framed title beside it. She reached out and adjusted the frame by half an inch, letting the sunlight catch it just right. The words "sole owner," Irene M. Thomas, gleamed like truth. From the doorway, Geneva called out, "You okay?" Irene turned, smiling. "Better than okay." She walked back to the party, her footsteps light on the floor she fought to keep. The music swelled just enough, the voices of women blooming into laughter behind her. Somewhere, a camera clicked. Somewhere else, a story had just begun. Voiceover, soft and deliberate. "When they hid my pills, they tried to end my story. But I remembered the most important part. I left with the papers. I came back with the pen."